Hello there. Today we're going to be talking about some books surrounding really intense relationships with really obsessive people. We have Your Driver is Waiting by Priya Guns, Hex by Rebecca Dinerstein Knight, and Open Wide by Jessica Gross. This came out in the beginning of August, and I have just recently finished it. It follows our protagonist, Olive, and the very first scene, she's walking through New York City on her way to her volunteer position at a food bank, and she's recording everything, both recording background noise for her job as a radio host, and also recording every single conversation that she has. You get the sense immediately, and I think she tells you that this is something that she's been doing for a very long time, and quite obsessively. She studies the recordings that she takes to see how she is acting in conversations, to study the social elements and what she could be doing better, and also to remember things about her friends and seem like a better friend. She's on her way to this volunteer job at the food pantry, which she does with really the sole purpose of finding love, something that she really pities herself for not having found yet in her life. I think she's in her mid-30s. She details all of the ways in which she's set up situations in order to meet her one true love. She's trying to orchestrate a meet cute. She'll get her friends together and she'll say, bring someone who you really love. And it's kind of funny here to read all of the different things she's done, all of the dinners that she's held, and the every weekend in summer we all meet up for a picnic in the park kind of things. Because she's like, yeah, I emailed all 30 of my closest friends. You have 30 of your closest friends. I don't think I have had 30 friends over the course of my entire life. That's crazy to hear her talk about how much love and community she has in her world and how it's just not enough because she doesn't have this romantic partner. She also does kind of resent all of her friends for finding love before her, but it isn't that her focus is so singular on finding a romantic partner that it makes her absolutely insufferable. Though her intentions aren't met with these meetups and this volunteering that she does, she still enjoys the things in and of themselves. Within just a few pages of this book, it's very clear that Olive has a strange and obsessive and kind of disturbing inner world that she's able to more or less keep to herself. It's also very clear how much she desperately wants to meet a man. It's kind of insane. I said she wasn't insufferable about it, and I more mean in her interpersonal relationships. In her head, she is insufferable about it. You know, the kind of person who all they can fucking think about is getting a partner. This is Olive to an insane degree, to a mental illness degree. But at this shift at the food pantry, she does meet a new guy, a cute guy. His name is Theo, and immediately it's very evocative. This I don't know, instant tenderness and intimacy between the two of them. You kind of want to think that she's reading into things because she is being insane, but the way she's acting isn't insane. And it seems like Theo does reciprocate her feelings. I think this does a really good job of capturing the emotionality and also the physicality of having a crush. The way she describes him smiling and her being able to see this gap between his teeth as a secret between the two of them. It is all very evocative, and it shows the reality without being too mushy, and also without shying away from the kind of unsightly parts of having a crush on someone, which there are plenty. Specifically for Olive, for whom this is incredibly high stakes. The two of them take any moment that they have to speak to each other, and then when other people who are volunteering show up, they stop their conversation, which does feel like a sign. You can't help but believe all of the things that she thinks indicate that Theo likes her back. They both talk about their 9-to-5s, how she is a radio host. She interviews writers who are in the middle of their process. It's an anti-timeliness thing because writers are always going on these book tours after they're done, and she wants to hear about what it's like when you're really inside of what you're doing. And he talks about how he is a surgeon, a colorectal surgeon, and he likes being in there. He likes how guts feel. He admits it. They're slippery and they're kind of soft and warm, and he enjoys that. And he also likes the focus of operating on a human body. This woman steals his phone number from the sign-up book for the volunteers, and you're like, oh my God, no. And then she texts him that night, and it's mortifying. But he's like, I'm so glad that you texted me. It's very clear now that she's not hallucinating the reciprocation here. He obviously likes her back. Immediately, this becomes the most important thing in her life, as you know it's going to, even just 15 pages into knowing Olive. And the two of them do begin dating. It's very real in its honeymoon phase intensity. One day, he breaks his routine of texting her good morning, and it fucks everything up. And at first, you're thinking, girl, he just forgot. You're being crazy, take it down a notch. And then over the course of the day, you start to believe in her paranoia. You buy into what she's saying. You start thinking, you know what? This is evidence that something's going on between the two of you, and this is bad until she meets up for her friend with dinner, and then all of a sudden you're seeing the situation through her friend's eyes, and you're like, no, you are being overly sensitive. He just forgot. Theo and Olive seem like a really good couple. They both have this deep, like, innate desire to know others, specifically strangers. They both are collecting, like, ephemera of the lives of strangers and knowledge of strangers. Olive with her recordings that she's still doing secretly to every single person in her life. And she keeps thinking, I'm going to tell him one day. And you keep thinking, don't tell him, this is not okay. Like, she's recording when they're having sex without his knowledge. Theo collects scraps of paper with writing on them and little forgotten objects on the subway, some of which are kind of gross. I mean, like a scrunchie with some hair left in it, or like somebody's gum wrapped up in the wrapper. And I will say that him being a little bit gross about it does make you start to think maybe he would be okay with the recordings. Though every time she brings it up, it's like you're watching through your fingers. It is mortifying. A lot of this book is, girl, please keep that to yourself. Please stop imagining telling anyone about your inner thoughts. They're too much, and no one is going to put up with it. No matter how perfect you think your relationship with Theo is, the kind of shit that's going on in your brain is too much for, like, basically anyone else to handle. Though it's hard to leave Theo behind, Olive has to go on a trip with her two older sisters to visit their mom. And this is such an interesting and unique dynamic between Olive and her mother, because this is a mom who's toxic because she loves you too much. She's too interested in you. She's like abrasively positive, and she's very, very lonely, and you're the only antidote. She wants to be Olive or be one of the sisters, but it's not in the typical way that you see, in that she doesn't project her desire for youth onto Olive or her sisters, and she also doesn't seem to be jealous of them. She is a master manipulator, though. A lot of that manipulation you need to see through Olive's eyes. You need Olive to kind of explain it to you because she has years of experience dealing with her mother. But she also has these stories that show exactly how strange she is. Specifically, her reading Olive's diary, which, you know, some moms do that. That's not like the most atypical thing in the world. It's a huge breach of trust, but it is something that happens. What she also did when she read Olive's diary was try on her underwear as like a 13-year-old and leave that underwear dirtied in Olive's underwear drawer. That is fucking insane. As the youngest sister, Olive has had a little bit more innocent of a view of their mom, but has also been most affected by her because she was the only one left alone with their mom. When her oldest sister was born, her parents were still together, and then both of her sisters went off to college. They have a pretty big age gap, and so Olive was alone in the house with her mom for like 10 years, and they slept in the same bed that entire time. Olive has lots of memories from her childhood of waking up in the night to her mom just looking at her, just kind of hovering over her and just saying, I was just looking at you because I love you so much. It's really intense, and it has obviously very much affected the way Olive shows up in her relationships. While she's on this trip, she's calling Theo, but she hasn't told anybody that her and Theo are together yet, partly because she knows how intense her mom is going to be about it. Theo tells her that he got in trouble at work that day for stealing a glob of discarded tissue from one of his patients. Oh my God. He took it, he put it in a little plastic baggie, and then it fell out of his pocket during the next surgery. I still can't get over how horrific this was to read about. That is crazy. Hearing this, Olive is a little bit emboldened, and she decides to like test the waters kind of with Theo by telling her family that she's been recording them for her entire life, basically. Now, I will say there is a little bit of a plot here that I noticed, because Olive was gifted this recorder, her first recorder, when she was like 8 or something like that, and she recorded everything and has boxes and boxes of tapes, and she did it all in secret. And I don't understand how an 8-year-old managed to buy all of these tapes in secret without anyone catching on to what she was doing. But we have to just move past that. It's just part of the book that was not addressed at all. Her family doesn't love that she's been recording them. They say it's a violation of privacy. She promises that the recordings are only for her and she's never going to do anything with them, but they still say that it's not something that they're all that comfortable with. Her mom is not into it until she says, well, I record them because I want to listen to them back because I love you. And then her mom's like, you love me? Okay, never mind. You can do it whenever you want. When Olive gets back from this trip where she's kind of starting to see through her mom more and more, Her and Theo's relationship and their romance continues, and it is still very intense, and she has very intense feelings about it. At one point, she sets up for this date, and he's an hour late. He works as a surgeon. His hours can be really difficult, and it's really difficult for her to share him with anything else, including his job. She feels supreme jealousy about this. They're obviously both a little bit upset at each other throughout this date. And then for some reason, things warm back up. And she's like, now is the moment for me to tell him about the recordings. And he's upset, as he very well should be. He goes for a walk. She sobs her eyes out. And then he comes back and he's like, I don't know. He's really weirdly intense about it, though it does feel very realistic when you're reading it. He says, do you record us when we're having sex? And he just like stares her down. And she says, yeah. I've recorded every time we've had sex. And he's like, is it hot? She's like, it's very hot. And he says, put it on right now and we're going to have sex to the recording of us having sex. And then like things are kind of all well and good. He does say that was a violation and you are not allowed to record me unless I know about it. And you have to send me every single recording that you've ever taken of me. And she does do it. So every night, Olive, while Theo sleeps, has been like kind of fondling his gap between his bottom teeth. This is something that she finds delectably enthralling about Theo, and always has from moment one, like I said. She's always pushing the boundary with his teeth, and by that I mean like putting her finger in there. She starts by just staring at it, and then she just kind of like touches it gently, and then she pushes. She pushes her finger into the gap, and she feels the teeth move. And every night she pushes it a little farther until one night she pushes it so far that it opens up and splits him open all the way down his body. And now he's open and she can see his insides. And she can also get into him, step into his body that is open like it's being operated on, and then curl up and then zip him back up from the inside and sleep in there. What the fuck? Being inside your partner's body is apparently the most relaxing place you can be. It cures her insomnia. She's never felt closer to anybody, figuratively and literally. And in here, she really feels like she is Theo's and Theo is hers, which is something very important to someone who puts so much value on romantic relationships like Olive does. When Theo wakes up that next morning, nothing seems to be amiss with him. He doesn't know what has happened with Olive because who could ever have anticipated that would happen? But he does tell her about these dreams he had about eating until he was so full. And in hearing this, she remembers having the same kinds of dreams as a child. And she thinks back and she puts the pieces together and she knows that her mom did the same thing to her when she was young. And as the victim, she can understand this as a violation, as an intrusion, but she really is trying to justify herself doing it to Theo, saying it's different because they're partners, not mother and daughter, even though a lot of the things that bother her about her mom doing this aren't really affected by that dynamic. She needs to justify unzipping Theo and crawling into him because she very quickly becomes absolutely addicted to doing it. And the way it describes addiction is very compelling. And you start to kind of think maybe she does actually need to do this. She says it starts as a steady undercurrent of desire to crawl inside Theo again, which grows day by day from a trickle to a rush to an absolute roaring need, crowding out every other thought or feeling. Olive discovers that she's accidentally recorded Theo during this intrusion. She had never turned off the recording that he asked her to make of them having sex that night. And she hears him moaning in either pain or pleasure, and it building up until he screams, possibly in orgasm, or is it in pain? And does that matter? What changes if her going inside of him is affecting him without his consent or knowledge, which had been her justification that it wasn't affecting him. So Olive is carrying around this secret with her, kind of like the recording, but obviously so much more of a violation. She's always thinking that she's going to tell Theo about it, but she can never bring herself to actually do it. In her mind, she calls it climbing, which is such interesting language because you kind of think of that as moving up, or maybe as like a conquering or a journey. After Olive tells her mom that she's seeing Theo, her mom shows up in New York City out of the fucking blue, and her overstepping and her manipulation is so insane and so frustrating to read. You're watching their conversations and you're just begging Olive to say no to her mother, which she actually brings herself to kind of do. Ever since she realized that her mother had been climbing into her, she's been pulling away from her. Her mom says, "Can I stay at your apartment?" Which every time she comes to New York, she sleeps in Olive's bed. And Olive says, "No, Theo and I sleep there." And her mom pushes back and pushes back, but Olive manages to stand her ground, thank God. Her mom is just very like self-pitying about this. Like she'll be like, "Well, does that mean that you don't love me? Are you upset at me?" Through this whole visit, Olive is seeing her mom through a new lens. She's seeing how close she's trying to push herself to Theo, the overstepping there, kind of like awkwardly kissing his neck, showing off for him, showing him her nails like this is something that Olive finds very uncomfortable. And her mom's specific brand of manipulation is so effective that you, as the reader, reading through Olive's perspective, you are sometimes falling for it. Olive will say, "That's her manipulating something," and you'll think, "Well, is it?" A couple weeks after this visit with her mom, Olive tells Theo everything. In a rush, she just lets it all spill out. And Olive had never really considered the logistics of this or what other people would think about this insane thing that she's been doing. And in turn, you also never really considered that. It is just insane, and it's something that you're just meant to accept. But Olive was so blinded by her not just desire, but need to go inside of Theo that she never thought hard about it. And so now she finds herself in this situation where she needs to like prove to Theo that this is real and that she has not just gone insane. Theo makes her do it while he is awake, and it does happen. He sees exactly what she's been describing. This is real. Theo tells her that the experience is so incredibly painful that it's excruciating to the point of actually turning into this dull pleasure. He enjoys it, but he is mad at her because this is a violation like no other. So he tortures her by telling her that she can't climb into him until he has done it to her. And then, for weeks, he doesn't do it. And this is the most distressing scenario for Olive, because not only can she no longer fulfill her addiction, she is also now questioning whether or not Theo even loves her, because of course, if he loved her, he would climb inside of her. Finally, after so long, he does it, and she hates the feeling of it. It is painful, but what she hates is the lack of autonomy, the lack of control, which is something that she's had throughout this relationship, doing all of these things to Theo without his knowledge. They had never really discussed the logistics of this, so Theo gets inside of her, and he doesn't come out as quickly as she expects him to. And she starts to believe that he will never come out. It's absolutely 100% up to him. She can't pull him out. And she thinks about like what she's going to tell his family and his job. It is a little bit terrifying. You also believe that Theo is just going to stay in there. But of course he doesn't. He comes out and he says, "It was so relaxing. I fell asleep." You should know that. You fell asleep in me tons of times without my consent. He's obviously quite bitter about it, as he should be. Olive knows that Theo and her mom have been planning something, and she's just praying that it's a gift from afar because she's been trying to distance herself from her mom. She's explained to Theo now that her mom was doing this to her as well, and why that makes her so uncomfortable. She has gone through a lot of like senseless, very hypocritical justifications for why it's okay for her to do it to Theo without his consent, but her mom doing it to her is absolutely not okay. It completely changed their relationship and her perspective of her mother. After the last visit, Olive had told her mom in no uncertain terms, "You can't surprise visit me. You can't just show up in New York. If you're going to come here, you need to give me at least a month's notice." And her mom says, "I will tell you at least a month before I decide to come." And Olive says, "You will ask me a month before you want to come." And yet the surprise she's planning with Theo is a visit. And Olive manages to pry this out of Theo a day before her mom is meant to show up. And all of these things start falling into place in Olive's mind. Her mom had been asking kind of weird questions about like, are there locks on the doors in the bedroom in Theo's apartment? And she had forced Theo through her manipulation, so Theo believes that it's his own idea, to let her stay in his apartment. And it like comes to Olive in this like shock that her mom is planning on climbing inside of not her, but Theo. With the weird intimacy that she had treated Theo on the last visit and this texting that's going on between the two of them, it does seem very believable that this is what her mom's planning to do. But also, she has never confirmed that this is something that her mom did to her. It does seem very plausible. So Olive does what she feels is the only thing she can do to stop this from happening. And that is that she climbs inside Theo, and like she thought he had done to her, she doesn't come out. In case her mom ever tries to open him up, she will be in there waiting. She gives up her whole life. The end of the book is her saying, I have no idea how many weeks it's been since I climbed in here. She is now a part of Theo so that she can ensure that she will be the only one who can ever do this to him. And that's it. It's a pretty bleak ending, but for a minute there, I was expecting the ending to be that Olive and Theo came to an agreement about her climbing inside of him with his consent. And then that was it. And her life was like happily ever after. And she never went through any healing or any character growth or really confronted her relationship with like love and desire and being desired. That was not what happened. It was dark. So obviously this climbing inside your partner thing, it's a pretty on the nose metaphor that nonetheless was still shocking the first time that it happened. I think that it gets a little bit drawn out. I think it comes too early in the book so that you're given a chance to start kind of criticizing it and thinking about how incredibly on the nose it actually is. But the draw with this book is not that maybe kind of silly concept that does work for the most part. The draw here, why I loved it so much, is the characterization. Every character in this story, but particularly Olive, is so well conceived that you're forced to empathize with her, even when she does awful shit, even when her thoughts and behaviors are unjustifiable. It totally pushes you into Olive's head, and it takes you along with her very dramatic emotional ups and downs, making it even a little bit tiring to read sometimes because you feel everything Olive feels and she feels everything so strongly. Because all of the characters are so well conceived and well developed, their relationships are very real and interesting. I think the dialogue is the best written part of this whole book. Otherwise, it can be a little bit pretentious with like word choice, not in a way that's absolutely insufferable to read, but in a way that I did notice. The dialogue, however, I thought was perfect. I think that it knows exactly how much to give you. It shows you this perfect amount of like mundanity in their dialogue, in their relationship, because it knows that relationships are the regular moments and it knows how much to give you of those regular moments, that it's not boring you with them, but it is giving you a really good understanding of the characters without it necessarily always having to be something that pushes the narrative forward. I thought this was the most unique and complex mother-daughter relationship that I had ever read about. It was fascinating. Her mom's manipulation was both frustrating and also very easy to fall for. Like I said, it has you questioning Olive, and then it has you questioning yourself. It allows you to interpret things, and you can never really know what her mom's intentions are with anything that she does. And over the course of the book, you realize alongside Olive how toxic her mother is and how much that toxicity has impacted Olive. It's not often that you get to say that every single character in a story had a complex inner world, but Open Wide by Jessica Gross did it. Now, maybe I'm being a little bit generous because the last book that I read was a Frida McFadden book, and my biggest complaint was that none of the characters had an inner world. I remember like 2 pages into this, he's talking about being a surgeon, and she's like, what do you like about being a surgeon? And I was like, oh my God, I forgot that characters can like things. They can have thoughts and feelings about the world around them. Besides the characterization, I think this book does explore consent, addiction, desire, and intimacy in a very unique and compelling way. It's definitely a book for people who are like really, really intense in their relationships. It's for the yearners, but people who are yearning in like a way that's not okay. And I know that is a lot of people. And I support you, and I think you should read this. Maybe if you're in a good place, though. I think a lot of people will read this and see themselves in the character of Olive, whether or not that is comfortable. The next book I'm going to be reading here is Hex by Rebecca Dinerstein Knight. I fucking hate this cover. I think that this is heinous. This is awful, and yet I'm giving it a shot because the concept has always compelled me. It's about a PhD candidate who's like obsessed with both her work and her PhD advisor, and that sounds awesome. I'm a few pages in. I'm not gonna pretend like it's awesome so far, but I might change my mind. And if I do, or if I don't, I will see you when I'm done. Goodbye. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about Hex by Rebecca Dinerstein Knight. This is about a woman who is expelled from her PhD program where she studies the detoxification of poisonous plants, who is obsessed with her advisor. And that is an incredibly generous telling of what happens in this book, because what happens in this book and what this book is about is nothing. But I'm going to give you the spark notes anyway. Our main character, Nell, has been working with this PhD cohort of scientists trying to reverse toxins when they're all fired when one of them dies because she thought she was invincible and she allowed herself to be exposed to thallium. So upon being expelled, Nell's entire life is thrown into disarray. She was absolutely married to this research like everyone else in her cohort. She was taking undue risks. She was spending way too much time in the lab studying. And also at this same time, she breaks up with her partner, Tom. So she no longer has any purpose, this thing that she has been devoting her life to, and she also doesn't have this nice place to stay because Tom's family is rich. She certainly isn't heartbroken about breaking it off with Tom. They never really had a traditional relationship. They were kind of just stuck together by chance or by habit. And besides that, Nell never had the feelings for Tom that she had and still does have for her former PhD advisor, Joan. Joan knows that Nell is obsessed with her and is absolutely disinterested in her in a romantic sense, and that compels Nell even further. But Joan does kind of bring Nell in under her wing, at least while she's in the PhD program. Now that she's not, Joan is trying to get rid of her, and Nell will not leave these people alone. She's showing up to Joan's classes, she's waiting outside, she's hanging around the library hoping to get in. She has also stolen the plant seeds, the toxic plants, from the lab on her last day when she was packing up her stuff, and she's trying to grow those in her new apartment where she has no furniture. It's just literally just plant pots. The other characters at play here are Barry, who is Joan's husband. To Nell, Barry is loathsome. He is below Joan and below Nell, and he's a flirt with the undergrads. He also works at the university. I think it's Columbia. And then there's Nell's best friend, Mishti, who's like the most beautiful woman ever and can't eat as much pizza as Nell can, and spends a lot of time on her appearance. But she's so beautiful and everybody loves her so much because she's so beautiful, except Joan doesn't love her. I don't know, it's really strange. I don't really care to think about it more than that. I just think it's like, I'm not pretty like the other girls, but I have my brains behind me. And Joan, she can recognize that. She doesn't think beauty is the most valuable thing. It's just tired. So most of the book is kind of just Nell moping around without thinking or doing anything of note. And it's told in very exhaustingly purple prose. Not quite purple, actually. It's told in this experimental kind of language that doesn't make me believe that the author actually had the basis to start experimenting. I think this is a debut. And if not, it reads like one. A better way to say that is that this is MFA writing to the extreme, except without any beautiful descriptions. So Nell is still on the email list for the department that she was in, and she shows up to their department party. And Tom and Mishti are both there, and she can recognize that Joan is interested in Tom. And Mishti is interested in Barry. And this begins a whole lot of like incest in this group of people. It's like the fucking theater kids in high school. Mishti is dating Barry on the side, but it's just like coffee dates. It's because he advises the undergrads, even though I don't think she's an undergrad. She is quite a bit younger than Nell, and that's never really explained how they met or anything like that. None of these characters are anything. None of these characters have motivations or personalities or anything behind them. There's no depth. And then Joan is seeing Tom, and this is purely lust. This is a physical relationship thoroughly. Then after a while, Joan gets a grant because she's this kind of like big time botanist, and she hires Nell as her assistant with the grant money. I think this really just justifies Nell's invitation to Joan's Christmas party, which includes Barry, Mishti's boyfriend, who I forgot to mention. She has a boyfriend while she's seeing Barry, and that is Carlo, and also Tom. At this party, Joan and Tom just like go into the library with its glass doors and just like have sex basically for anyone to see. And then Nell finds Mishti in the bathroom, and Mishti's like, I've been in love with Tom this whole time. What? So everyone's been caught cheating. Joan had actually known that Barry and Mishti were seeing each other, and she loved it. It felt like it gave her an excuse to continue seeing Tom. She ends up leaving Barry. Nell is like not part of this group of people at all for the next couple of months, except she's still kind of friends with Mishti. No one has seen Joan or Tom. They assume that they're together. And Nell was rejected for that assistant position because she's been expelled. She's not a student at Columbia, and that was the criteria for the assistant position. Later on, there's what I believe is supposed to be like a big shocking moment where Barry admits that he's the reason that they knew not to accept Nell and that they had her like current academic records. But I don't fucking care. So everyone's gone their own ways. Joan has abandoned her life. Mishti has burnt out from being the beautiful, intelligent woman that she's always been. and being in love with Tom and not being able to have him. And then she goes over to Nell's place and she reaches into one of the plant pots and digs out this poisonous seed and she eats it. And that induces an abortion of a baby that nobody was aware of and nobody knows the father of. When Mishti is in the hospital, Tom shows up and he devotes himself to her. And then the last scene of the book, if you can believe it, we're at the last scene of the book, is a meeting between Joan and Nell in which nothing happens, because most of this book is nothing happening while you're forced to come along inside the scattered brain of this protagonist. So when talking about how I feel about this book that I absolutely hated, I need to first talk about the writing style. Now, I can recognize that this writing style will be something that some people like, and I can respect that. This is not something that I like. I found it to be exhausting. Like I said, I found it to be awful MFA writing. I thought it was experimentation with no base level of skill. There's these lines that are obviously trying to be hard hitting and they just like hurt to read. Like, for example, anybody should punch anybody in the face with beauty at any time without getting punched back by a penis. Okay. Okay, sure. Another line that I think is trying to be hard hitting is in this. I have, since that Christmas, assumed you loved lilies because it was the only plant I saw in your home. I have never interrogated it because you loved it. How is it that neither of us knew about them, about what they can do to cats? As if what we love can't hurt. Fucking Christ. So there's the really try-hard lines, and then there's also being try-hard in a different sense, which is just being absolutely incomprehensible, just literally saying words, like this paragraph. Now, the study of beauty and how it grows has become my work, and I think that's the best way of keeping it. But it also leaves the door open for something else to fill in the beauty as beauty center, the useless beauty, the not work. And I think what is really useless is the way I love you. I want to put that in the center. I am picking out the worst lines, but those are not alone in bad lines in this book. Most of the book is written in this ridiculous way. I just absolutely could not stand this writing, and there's a world in which I could see this being the point. This narrator who's so blinded by desire that she thinks that she has things to say about it. You know, when you're desperately, pathetically in love, and you just wax poetic for 200 pages? But even if this was deliberate, I found it to be so tiring and almost entirely meaningless. It is just written like that to be written like that. It's not saying anything, and it is certainly not doing a good job of writing a narrator who is obsessed with someone else in a way that I would understand the choices that it made in the style of prose. Because characterization doesn't really exist in this book. The characters maybe have like one personality trait, but I don't understand them at all. I was not brought to any sort of understanding of who Nell is and who Joan is and why Nell is attracted to Joan and compelled by her and obsessed with her. And she isn't even really that obsessed with her. She's writing sometimes in second person point of view to Joan, but even that is kind of wishy-washy. Like every once in a while, the you will not be Joan, it will be the reader. There's no commitment to the second person point of view, which to write in that point of view, you have to fucking commit to it and you have to know what you're doing. And I don't think that Knight knew what she was doing when she wrote this. I will give it one little tiny morsel of praise, and that is that sometimes when Nell is addressing Joan, it kind of like takes away the punctuation. It becomes very breathless, and I liked that. And I thought that that was achieving something. But most of this book, I couldn't appreciate anything else it was doing. Like, I think there's a sense of humor in here. I could recognize objectively that it was trying to be funny, and it might have been funny. I don't think it was necessarily unfunny, but I was so befuddled by this forced writing style that I could not bring myself to appreciate it. The writing made this such a boring book. It was an absolute drag to read. It took me so much longer than I thought it was going to. Like, 4 full days to read this tiny little thing, and it was agony the whole time. I felt like there were so many things that this book could have said, and it just refused to actually engage with anything with any depth. Like, where's any commentary on academia or the homoeroticism that should be innate to this story? Where's anything about the fact that Nell is in love with another woman? That was non-existent. What about the theme it's trying to touch on with, like, doing something with your life and external pressures? There's nothing. It's vacuous. It's absolutely empty. Instead of doing anything with the themes or the characters or the narrative, it feels like it's just a book that exists to say, look at how differently I can write. Look at the MFA that I have. Like I said, there's no strong characterization at all. I felt so distanced from them, both because there's no characterization and, again, because of the awful writing, the writing that I hated. It wasn't necessarily awful. I read you the worst bits. It was not easy to read. It was not easy to enjoy. Even if the characters were characterized in an interesting way, I think they were all so absolutely useless that I would have been irritated with them regardless. Nell is kind of having a breakdown over the course of this story, but there's no decline. There's no spiral. It's just random. Like, sometimes she'll just act out with no rhyme or reason, and I cannot commit myself to caring about that. I can't feel any tension from that. To fail at making me be interested in a book that is about a narrator who's having a breakdown and a narrator who is obsessed with someone else is a colossal failure. Especially with the obsession thing. Obsession and poison are selling points of this book. They are integral to the marketing of this book, and really they end up meaning nothing. They end up having very little impact. What do you mean? Instead, this book is just being inside Nell's head, and Nell's head is incredibly boring, and she's supposed to be like writing in these notebooks in an insufferable way, and it's all over the place. It's just Nell having all these little quips and these little like nuggets of wisdom that are meaningless. I don't think you can succeed in leaving me inside your character's scattered brain if that character is not introspective or reflective enough on herself or the world around her to have anything to say. Because then it's just word soup. And this book is word fucking soup. I also thought it was fake gay. I didn't think it was gay in any real sense. I thought it was gay just to say it was gay in the summary. And there was this weird thing that I noticed in the beginning where all of the characters were people of color, which, to be fair, are two, have their name meanings described, where that doesn't happen for any of the white characters. I didn't like that. I felt like that was deeply uncomfortable and strange and racially charged in a really weird othering way. Nell, as a name, I'm certain has a meaning. Mishti's name doesn't have a meaning just because her family is from India, you freak. Despite the way I'm talking about this book, I don't think that this was wholly objectively bad. I hated it. I absolutely despised it, but I can understand other people liking it. And I think I could easily accept why someone else might like it or what they took from it. Not for me. Oh my God, not for me. Oh my God, not for me. Jenny Slate blurbed this. Jenny Slate, writer of Little Weirds, best memoir ever. She needs to take on better projects, and that is including the books she decides to blurb. Thank you very much. I think in another author's hands, this premise could have been executed far better. I think if this was about what it said it was about, it would have been better, but with this writing style, I don't think I am interested in reading anything else by this author. It is so incredibly not for me. I cannot emphasize that enough. Jesus fucking Christ. The next book I'm reading is Your Driver is Waiting by Priya Guns. I'm about 80 pages in, and I will admit to you that no relationship has happened so far. I don't know necessarily if this fits with the other books. There have been allusions to a relationship or some sort of obsession. It is in the summary. I just don't know how significant it's going to be. However, I'm loving this. I think this is everything Hex isn't, and by that I mean it's written in normal fucking language, and it has characters who are characters. So I do think that I'm a little bit biased towards this book, in favor of this book, because I'm reading it right on the heels of Hex, which I couldn't have hated more. So I'm going to finish this and get back to you, and we'll talk about it. I'll see you then. Bye. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about Your Driver is Waiting by Priya Guns. This follows the Mani, who works awful hours for meager pay at a rideshare company. She has absolutely no control in her life. She's living in poverty, and she is bitter and angry because of it. The first 80 or so pages is showing a lot of the injustice and mistreatment that she faces working for essentially Uber. They just call it rideshare in the book. People always get into her car. It's so frustrating. It happens every time. They always say, "Do you know where you're going?" That's not the worst of it. People are incredibly racist to her and sexist to her, and she gets groped on the job. But it's very clear that no one, even the people who aren't outright about it, no one has any respect for her. They are frustrating, entitled, and rude, and they don't think of her as capable. In the beginning of the book, we're also introduced to Thamani's loved ones. She takes care of her mother, who is in a terrible state after her father's death about 6 months ago. It's unclear whether or not she's both mentally and physically unwell, or if her mental state has caused her physical disability. At this point, she's unable to walk, but Thamani's always asking her to just walk to the kitchen or walk to the bathroom or get to the front door and take a breath of fresh air, but she won't. She stays on the couch all day, and Thamani has to take breaks from driving to come home and carry her to the bathroom. Her mother is also very demanding. She's always blowing up Thamani's phone. She's always begging for things. She doesn't seem to have really internalized the dire state of their finances, and she allows Thamani to deal with everything, working these crazy hours while also begging for more. But Thamani also has a support system. She has two very close friends, Sharif and Stephanie. They're together and they have been for like 10 years. Sharif also works as a driver and owns a mechanic shop. And Stephanie has, I think, a math degree, but she works reading books to kids at the library. Everyone surrounding Thamani is poor. But her friends are also organizers. They're activists in like a really real, tangible way. Thamani's always talking about the protests happening in the city, and kind of she looks down on people who protest. There's a little bit of condescension in the narrative here with like, you must have a lot of privilege to be able to protest. And this idea that protesting doesn't really do anything, or like marches don't really do anything, which I think in some ways I agree with, but I think there's a lot more nuance to that is not brought up in this book. Her friends, however, they are part of like a socialist collective. They've taken over an abandoned building. They are for the people. They've been part of taking back space and doing things for their community. Sharif specifically is one of the lead organizers of the drivers and riders who are trying to get better rights for people working for rideshare companies. And he's always begging Thamani to be part of it, but he also understands that she doesn't really have the time to do anything other than make enough to keep her and her mom afloat, which they hardly are. Everyone in this book is disillusioned and powerless, but Thamani specifically is really unable to do anything about it. And also part of that is her refusing to try to do anything about it, though there are a lot of factors there. Often when she's driving, she's too tired to be driving. Some of the best fares are late at night when the clubs close, and at one point here, she runs into a woman. She doesn't hurt this woman, doesn't even knock her to the ground. She just kind of like bumps into her legs. And after this moment, she can't stop thinking about this beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed woman, and then they run into each other. She picks up this woman, Jolene, from her very fancy house in her very fancy neighborhood, and she takes her literally just a couple blocks up the road to an Ethiopian cafe. The two of them are immediately and incomprehensibly flirty with each other. It's like ramped up to 200,000. It's insane the way they're speaking to each other. They both seem really into it, though. She gets Jolene's number, and Jolene invites her to this fundraising event that's going on the next day. Thamani is thrown into this absolute whirlwind intensity of a romance that really makes no sense to you as the reader, but becomes the only thing in her life that she has to grasp onto. This fundraiser is incredibly easy to satirize in a way that I found maybe a little bit lazy. It's in this Ethiopian cafe filled with white people. There's wooden cutlery so that they're not harming the planet with plastic cutlery, but there's also like tons and tons of food waste. They start singing for children in Africa, not the children who are hungry in the city. And then the whole thing ends up being these people like shilling spring water. They're selling water, and a tiny little fraction of the proceeds go to hungry kids, and then a little bit of a bigger fraction goes to saving the oceans. Now, Thamani is obviously out of place here, both being basically the only person of color in the room and being someone who comes from this socialist collective where all of her friends hang out. She's now in like the very white, very uneducated, like first-time activist space. And Jolene, who's one of the organizers here, can sense her discomfort and is constantly trying to make sure she's okay. And also Thamani is also constantly trying to make sure Jolene is okay. It doesn't really make sense. Their intimacy is so instant, it feels like you've missed 10 chapters. They have spent maybe 15 minutes together, and all of a sudden they're like reading each other's moods perfectly. They're so concerned about the other's state. It's very strange. And it also doesn't make sense in the way that Joe immediately recognizes that this is not Thamani's scene. So like, why invite her? If that's something you know about her without knowing her at all, then you would have known it in the moment that you invited her. It's kind of senseless. Though Damani is blinded by her love and her attraction to this woman that she doesn't know at all, we as the reader can see Jolene as very performative. People are always coming up to her to say these things that Jolene is like looking off, like she's fucking Jim Halpert, looking off to Damani and like rolling her eyes like, aren't these people so silly? I'm not one of them. But it's like, you surround yourself with these people. You're just putting on a show because a person of color is here and you want to impress her. She's like privately trying to show herself as one of the good whites while also entertaining all of her problematic or just misguided friends who are her friends, who she has obviously entertained for a long time. This weird first date does not dissuade them because, like I said, their intimacy has been absolutely immediate. They go on this beach date just a couple of days later. They have sex on the beach, and that's it. Now they are together. Like, Joe is already talking about taking Damani to her family's beach house, going on vacation with her. I think that this is less showing how strange their relationship is developing, what a weird path it's taking, and more showing Joe's privilege. Her family has a beach house. She's able to just take a vacation. Her parents pay her bills. Whereas throughout this date, Damani has been stressing about missing a day of work. When Damani and Joe are apart, she's deeply unsure about their relationship. But when they're together, it is this intense honeymoon phase. While Damani is falling in love, her friends are organizing and they're trying to pull her into it, and she is refusing. She's ready for the life of wealth and luxury that Joe lives. And absolutely, why wouldn't she be? She's been struggling for so long, but it's a little bit hard to feel empathy while you're watching her abandon her friends, her support system, who she hasn't even had enough time to really appreciate. So Damani and Joe are in love, and while it's hard to understand their relationship, and you can very clearly see that it's not as perfect as either of them are deluding themselves into believing it is, you're able to understand Joe as being well-intentioned up until this point in the story where Damani takes her to meet her friends at this collective. It's called the Doo-Wop, this abandoned warehouse. At this party they're throwing at the Doo-Wop, Sharif makes a joke about how they're about to bomb the rideshare company's headquarters. It's obviously a joke, but nobody realizes that Joe has taken it seriously until they all sit down at a table and Sharif starts talking about their actual plan to organize, which he's never able to get into because Joe thinks that she knows everything. She speaks over everyone. She speaks to them with crazy loaded language, calling them aggressive, calling them strong and fierce women, also calling them vulnerable at points. She is one of the people who's like, I don't believe in violence under any circumstances, violence that she has just assigned to them, that is not even real. And she thinks we need to change the system. She thinks with the fundraisers that she does with her people will solve everything. And they're very patiently, very generously, graciously trying to explain to her that it's not as simple as that. And she's like, let's just go march downtown. And they're like, well, we have been marching. This is something that we've been doing and we appreciate your concern, but that's not going to work for us. We need to strike. We need ownership of this company, considering we're the people who make it run. And she's like, well, that's not going to work. We just need to work within the system. It is one of the most difficult to read, mortifying conversations I have ever encountered in my life. I was genuinely holding my breath the whole time. It goes over like 6 pages. I kept having to put the book down. It was stressing me the fuck out. Joe cannot stop confidently saying the absolute wrong thing, and she cannot stop being a racist white activist. It's, oh my God. I can't describe it to you. It was so fucking tense. Like I said, Sharif is being so generous and patient. And yet, when the conversation isn't going Joe's way, she pulls the fucking white woman misogyny card and she shuts him up. Everyone hates her. And though Damani does not speak up during this entire conversation, when Joe leaves, everyone is kind to her. They say, it's not your fault. We understand that white activists can be like that, can act like they are the spokesperson. When Damani finds Joe, Joe is on the phone. We all know it's to the police. She talks to Damani and she implies that Sharif is a fucking terrorist because he's Arabic and he has a beard. The cops swarm the Doo-Wop, something that has been a fear throughout this entire book, something that they have been desperately hoping does not happen because they're doing illegal things and they have undocumented workers here. Undocumented workers which are arrested because of Jolene, detained, and then deported. Sharif also is arrested on suspicion of terrorism. And despite all of this, despite her anger, Damani cannot accept that this relationship is over. She cannot accept that Joe won't have a conversation with her. And so she begins kind of stalking her. Well, not kind of. She begins kind of stalking her, and that quickly turns into full-on stalking her. She's calling her hourly. She ends up breaking into Joe's house, stealing things, moving things around, hoping that Joe can feel her presence in there. Then she follows Joe to the track field at night and attacks her and pins her to the ground. Damani becomes a bomb that is ready to blow at absolutely anything, which as the reader, you kind of think is fair after all of this mistreatment that you've seen her face, particularly from her customers, but now in this relationship with Joe. Someone honks at her and she fully gets out of her car and starts banging on their window. She's spiraling. She's losing it. She does the very typical, like, shaves off her hair in the bathroom. She bleaches it. She gets removed from being able to work on the rideshare app pending investigation into her possible criminal activity, so she spray paints her car to say taxi. She's completely lost it. We're now at about the climax of the story, where she sees there's protests on the TV. She sees that Joe is there. She goes to find her. She chases her down. Joe sees her and starts running. And Damani tries to run Joe over with her car, but ends up crashing into the police station. Then all of the protesters, these protesters who, by the way, Damani has looked down on for this entire story, they protect her. They rip all of the identification off of her car and they protect her to run away. And she's never caught for running into the police station. The book ends with Joe trying to relieve her guilt by fundraising a bunch of money, because everything can be solved with a fundraiser in her eyes, to give to Damani and her mom. They get $8,000. And that's kind of it. The very last scene in the book is a few months later when Damani sees Joe walking down the street holding hands with a woman who looks exactly like Damani. I do think the ending of this story is a little bit unsatisfying, considering that everything is so perfectly wrapped up for Damani. She's rewarded, and she never really introspects in any way. She is not a perfect character. She is actually deeply flawed, and there's no consequences for that. Though I will say about the end here, her spiral is so entertaining and tense that I didn't feel totally disappointed. It's more looking back, like 10 minutes after finishing it, that I started thinking, okay, so that's it? She just wins in the end, when a lot of her thoughts and behaviors have been pretty fucking insufferable. Thematically, I thought this book wasn't super deep, but it was also doing more than just scratching the surface. I think that it was satirizing really, really easy to pick on, low-hanging fruit, but it was doing so pretty well. There was definitely some biting commentary in here. It was just very on the nose and often about things that were really stereotypical. Though I did think some of Damani's internal commentary on wealth inequality was pretty fucking milquetoast at best, with her just kind of observing, like, some people have nicer clothes than me. Some people are rich and I'm poor. I did think that the depiction of class struggle in this book was really well done. It was a pretty nauseating portrayal of how soul-destroying poverty and the gig economy are. I personally felt so incredibly stressed about Damani's money situation on the smallest of scales. I did find the writing in this book to be pretty weak. I didn't think it was terrible, it just wasn't strong. A lot of the analogies and similes are kind of just cringy. There's this very forced attempt to use slang in the dialogue that I just don't think fit. It felt very random. Every once in a while, someone would say fam or fab or bomb, and it kind of felt like it was distancing me from the characters. It didn't make them feel quite human. The dialogue in general was so incomprehensible at times, specifically between Joe and Damani, that I almost started considering if it was deliberately doing that. In the beginning of their relationship, a lot of the book is dialogue, and it feels like their conversations are a highlights reel without making it clear that it's a highlights reel. It wants to tell you just the most important parts, but there's no segue between these parts, so it seems like nonsense. Like, you don't understand how they get from one point to the next. I will say that I do think the total incomprehensibility of Damani and Joe's relationship was on purpose. I think that makes sense to me, that they were both using each other and didn't see each other as whole and complete people. That Damani thought that Joe was seeing her as human, unlike every other person who gets into her car, and Joe was using Damani as a diversity point. So it made sense that their relationship was so strange and followed this very strange and intense path. They were both looking for something in the other that was never going to allow them to see the other person as a person. Generally, everything in this story is a little bit too blown up, a little bit cartoonish, but that's not totally unexpected with satire. It's not terrible satire. It's not like it's the best satire I've ever read. While it's not the most well-written or satisfying book, and I really did want to see Damani face some consequences for her behaviors and how quickly she was able to turn on her peers, I did think that it was punchy. I think that it had things to say, just not necessarily anything that I'm going to think about long term. If you're looking for something compulsively readable with short chapters and a narrative that will maintain your interest, and you don't necessarily need the most fleshed out characters ever, I think this is a good pick. It didn't have all that much to it, but I don't think it needed to have all that much to it. That is the end of the video. If you're going to read one of these books, read open wide. If you're going to avoid one of these books, avoid Hex. Except if you liked it, please tell me what you liked about it. I'm genuinely interested and I don't want to argue with you. I just want to know what a different reader would get out of that fucking book. And if you're looking for a pretty fun time, I would read Your Driver is Waiting. That's all from me today. I'll see you later. Goodbye.